Okay, now you're good.
Okay, good evening and welcome to the May meeting of Community Development and Housing Committee. It is 6:33 and I will call the meeting to order. Welcome to everyone. First up on the agenda, as usual, Vortex will give us an update on housing initiatives. Thank you.
Okay, I did one update.
Ah, must be a good one.
So Michelle, you're very familiar. Oh,
Yes.
I'm about to update. So, Kingston is one of the members of the county's housing program called Housing Smart Communities Initiative.
Mhm.
So we joined that, I think, in 2023, and that program encourages municipalities to take various housing actions. And one of those is housing events, or housing education events. And so our task force is hosting two events in June, on June 3rd and June 24th. How can we shape the future of housing in Kingston? I think it's not often that we have a housing discussion that's Kingston centric, right? Sometimes we have them in the county context, right? Or sometimes we're just discussing one specific issue. And so these are Kingston specific topics. For the first session on June 3rd, it's very much focused on affordability and development. And I think we'll have some speakers that we don't usually hear from, which includes, we have a local housing developer who has an approved project that she's trying to build, kind of a small scale development. And then we also have Sisters of Charity Housing Development Corporation also participating. They traditionally do more work downstate, but are also now looking to do some more work up here in Kingston specifically. And so it's great to have a new nonprofit and entering the market, if you will. And then the event is hosted by HRNA, so they'll be providing some good context and guiding the discussion. June 24th session is on landlord-tenant relationship and how we can create a relationship that is stable for all. And so we'll have representatives from legal services, National Low Income Housing Coalition, and also a local property manager as well. So those June 3rd is Restorative Justice Center and June 24th is Clinton Avenue Methodist Church.
6 to 7:30.
6 to 7:30 both sessions. I have flyers here, you can help take them. But I just wanted to make the community aware that these two events are happening. Any questions?
Thank you.
Not about this specifically, but I was wondering if you could answer some questions about the vacancy study.
Sure.
So there is a vacancy study going on right now?
There it is, yes.
And when did that begin?
That began in late April.
And when does that end?
There's no end date per se because I'm still collecting responses.
And how many properties were canvassed?
And
amounting to how many units?
That's a complicated question based on the survey methodology, so I'd prefer to send you some of that information as a follow-up. But also because the survey is ongoing.
Can we see a copy of the survey being sent to property owners?
I believe so, yes.
And how will the information provided by the property owners be verified?
There's a host of verification steps. We now have, as you're aware, some changes in the state law, right, that increase our ability to make sure that we have verified information, and that includes copies of rental rolls as requested by the city.
And so when will we see the results?
Because I'm still gathering that information, I don't know. Yeah, although my goal is to have a study that's released sometime this summer. But again, it's dependent on receiving responses, feeling confident about those responses. You know, I wouldn't work as I did in 2022, right? I'm not releasing something that I don't feel confident about, that I can't stand behind. So that would be my goal as well, this survey.
Okay, and this isn't directed at you, so I don't want you to take this the wrong way. But it's extremely frustrating that this committee was not told that a vacancy study is ongoing. And from my constituents, I have to like hear about it, and I incidentally find out that a vacancy study is ongoing. It just seems like we've been purposefully left out of the loop when it's supposed to be kind of directed by the council.
Why would it be directed by the council? I'm not understanding.
Because we declare the rental emergency.
Right, so the common council has that legislative authority. They have the authority, this council will be receiving the results of that rental vacancy study. Then, you know, in order to change any emergency declaration, they also have to set a public hearing. I mean, the council still preserves that legislative authority. Certainly the rental vacancies, the fact that the rental vacancy study is being completed doesn't change that.
But if we were told that this was already happening, we could anticipate the field questions from property owners and from tenants, because tenants have been completely out of the loop on this. Which I know that there's no vacancy study for tenants, but
Right.
those are the ones who would be able to tell you honestly that my apartment next door has been warehoused for 2 years.
Again, the only resolution, right, that I'm going off of is the one that the common council passed 3 years ago, which set forth the requirement that a rental vacancy study to be performed every 3 years, but there's no details about including the council in that or process or anything like that. I guess I'm just what would the role, I mean.
Well, what could that look like? Could it be, I mean, if it's gonna be every 3 years, which you know, it's a long time from now. Are you planning on starting at the same time? Like, will April always be the start date? So if we know that ahead of time, then
I mean, yeah,
you know, like if it's every 3 years and we know that it's going to be the fourth month of each year and we can just track that, that's one way of not letting that happen.
Yeah, and I mean, I even have questions about the timeline, you know, May, June, July, August are statistically when vacancies are highest for apartments, when there's the highest turnover of leases. It's just, to me, it creates more questions than answers.
well, I
And it's,
can,
again, frustrating to just sort of hear about it in passing, that this huge thing is happening that could affect the lives of thousands of our constituents.
I'm happy to pass along a copy of the survey and discuss any aspect of my methodology. Again, this council will have to vet the survey when that's produced, right? And at that point, I can speak more to any particular result, but yeah, the rental vacancy study is on.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions.
I was just curious about the number that was in the Napoli report of like less than 700 units being covered.
I am not sure where that number came from.
Okay.
Yes. I'm not sure
Okay.
because it doesn't reflect. I'm not sure actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a different number.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope so. I hope it's higher.
Yeah.
Right, because that's like half of what was originally.
Yeah,
declared,
again,
right?
I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Thank you. Bob, do you have a question or do you just look like you're?
Yeah, just sitting here, no questions.
What do you got going on there, Bob?
Oh, yeah, I had a little surgery. So the elevate, so I'm elevating.
Okay, anyone else have any questions for Bartek?
Thank you.
I guess the only
I'll
thing
take
is
one of the
that
flyers.
if I mean, obviously, if you do for some reason receive some kind of a communication from a property owner, feel free to let me know. I'm not sure what that would be, but if a request or something, feel free to let me know.
Thank you.
Okay, go away, you're up.
Okay, so I was before this committee last year to discuss this concept of public mixed income development. I used a very small portion of my ARPA funds to start a relationship with CPE, the Center for Public Enterprise, which is a national nonprofit, and they specialize in expanding public sector capacity in various ways. And one of those fields is housing. And specifically this model that I'm going to refer to as public mixed income development. And when we speak about, or we talk about affordable housing and affordable housing subsidy, the context is we obviously need more housing and more affordable housing at different income levels. But that production is highly constrained by the availability of public subsidy. And the primary method that we have is the low-income housing tax credit. And that on an annual basis, particularly in New York, is oversubscribed and highly competitive, and also quite complex from a developer's perspective to navigate. And so, we really have limited tools at our disposal, especially from a small municipalities perspective in terms of housing production. And we obviously know that production is here in Kingston is inadequate, and the market isn't necessarily going to meet that need.
So I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I was going to say, feel free to
Yeah.
tell me.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to
Yeah.
ask a question. So oversubscribed means that we're tapping out those resources, and the undersubscribed means people aren't using those. What is that?
Right. So the way that the limits for basically the limits for low income housing tax credits are set by the federal government on each state. And yes, for some reason in some of these states, there's an undersubscription, meaning that there's not enough application. There's more in the pool than there are qualified applicants to use those funds. That's not the case in here.
Thank you.
And so there's this different model out there, and it's the public housing development model. And this has received a lot of attention in the past year or two, and it was led by Montgomery County in Maryland, the Housing Opportunities Commission. And this is just there was a recent brief by the NYU Furman Center last fall on the model, and the NYU Furman Center are considered to be the premier research firm for New York. And this model also won the 2024 Ivory Prize, which is kind of like the Oscars, if you will, for housing ideas. And so it's been receiving a lot of attention recently, and that's the way I was introduced to this model as well. Is through some of the media coverage and some of the successes that Montgomery County has had in particular with this. And so now there are Montgomery County, in addition to Montgomery County, there are jurisdictions all across the country that are exploring this model. And so we're the yellow pin mark there in the Northeast. And so this is a national model all across the country. It's not limited to one region, which I think is encouraging that places with different contexts are finding ways to scale the model to fit them and kind of adjust as needed. There's 3 ingredients to make this model work. So number one, typically that there's a long-term public ownership or public interest. And typically that public ownership is paired with some kind of a tax relief for the project. Number 2, there's low-cost debt. So as part of any capital stack for a project, instead of turning to the private equity market, you find another source of low-cost debt to make that project happen. And third, there's a revolving loan fund. So the jurisdiction that's creating this model creates a revolving loan fund. And so typically, it's when we talk about development, it's a public-private partnership. And so there's a public developer, which assumes greater than 50% ownership, and then there's selected development partner that actually constructs the project. I'm not going to go into this in too detail, but this is the life cycle of the revolving loan fund. And so here we have the revolving loan fund. Here it's called the housing production fund. Out of that housing production fund, the jurisdiction makes a construction loan, which helps to make that project actually happen. Once that project is completed and fully leased, the loan that the housing production fund made initially is actually repaid back to the fund. And so that housing production fund will be able to continue. But basically, because of the housing production fund loan is key to making a project happen. Because we're not the private market, the housing construction loan is charging a very low interest, right? So typically it's just enough to make sure that the production fund is able to keep up with inflation. But the subsidy is we're charging a very low interest, right? We're not charging what a private equity investor would charge. And so here are some of the ambitions for this model, which we can discuss. And I think these ambitions are based on proven successes in other places. And so I believe we can undertake 1 to 2 projects per loan cycle. And so that would be every 3 to 5 years in support of the city's housing goals. Each project is mixed income, and we are not using any federal or state housing subsidies. And we're including deeply affordable, and market rate units. So it's a mixed income. Every project is mixed income. The affordability is permanent, and it also has a design that will last for generations. One great thing about this model is some of the other jurisdictions that have used this are much larger than Kingston, obviously, but the model does scale to projects of varying sizes. So in our financial model, an ideal size is about 100 units, but the model can scale to support smaller projects as well. To the extent possible, we're either taking advantage of public land that we already own that's vacant, or we're helping stalled market rate projects that need before they can begin. This will be a public-private partnership. So we're developing a relationship with a private partner. And these are partners that want to build housing, right? And are coming to the city basically either for the land, right, or to obtain the contribution of the revolving loan fund. In exchange, we're assuming this public ownership, public interest, and the affordability parameters. We did issue a request for information to see if any. This hinges on private partners or nonprofit partners that are actually interested in this model, and we did receive 6 responses, which is a good sign at this point, because it's when we communicated this last year, it's just a general opportunity. Anything specific about it. I think another great thing about this is it's locally controlled, and we're not at the whims of federal subsidies or state subsidies.
Can I ask a question about the developer interests?
Yeah.
Were those nonprofit developers, or were there also for-profit or mixed?
Yeah, both nonprofit and for-profit.
I do have a follow-up question. Do these developers have experience with are they local? Or are they more like national ones who already use this model in other areas?
No one has used this model, had used this model. You know, there are not many places that have used the model yet. These were 5 out of the 6 were local, meaning have worked in the state.
Okay.
Is how I would define it.
Are you able to share the response for? Okay, thank
I
you.
don't have
Not, just the original thing that we sent out.
the
Request,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Happy.
Actually, everybody's kind of stolen what I wanted to ask. I'm looking at this, I mean, this seems pretty impressive to me, but since you're a lot more involved than me, to have 6 developers express interest that quickly, that seems like really good.
Yeah,
Or is that not?
I think it's very good.
Yeah.
And so the only other municipality that's exploring this model in New York, to my knowledge, is Syracuse, which is, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, 10 times, I don't want to be,
150,000.
it's much larger than Kingston.
Yeah.
They also received 6 responses. So,
Same 6?
no, different 6. So given the scale, you would expect them to receive many more. So I think that speaks to, there's actually real interest in trying to make this work. There we go. Yeah.
And regarding the sort of mixed ownership, are we talking like the city would be 51%, the developer 49? Or would it also be, could we also partner with non-for-profits that have partnered with other previous developments? Like, does it have to be sort of the almost even split, or can we include other partners?
Yeah, I think it can be other partners. I think part of that will be, I don't want to say negotiated, but looked at on a per project basis, like what makes sense. It could be 51-49, it could be something different based on the specifics of the project. Maybe there would be, a benefit to having a nonprofit involved, another nonprofit, depending on the project.
Michelle?
So what are the parameters for deeply affordable? Are
So-
they set for everyone the same way? Is it-
Yeah, so in the model, it's 50% AMI, be the deeply affordable. And typically, that's 20% of the units be at 50%. That would work. And then another 10% would be under 80% AMI. So between 60 to 80, again, depending on the project, but the 50% AMI are the non-negotiables.
Okay, yeah.
So that would change.
And it wouldn't, like average out, it would be set 50?
Yeah.
Okay.
50 max for those 20%.
Thank you.
So there's a whole bunch of implementation steps, obviously, to making this happen. And CPE has gotten us a fair bit along on some of these steps. Obviously, we have to establish the revolving loan fund. There's a governance question, like who's leading this effort? How are we, making this work on a per project level? And then pipeline developments, this goes back to developer interest, like do we actually have land? Are there other projects that this model could apply to? And so I just want to briefly share the structure that we believe is most appropriate to lead this forward. And so we believe that a new nonprofit should be formed, more or less a subsidiary or an arm of the city. And that would have its own board. And for every project, the nonprofit would create a housing development fund corporation. And that HDFC would actually hold the title to each building. Michael, this gets back to your question, right? There's a relationship with the developer, but the percentage of ownership then depends on each project. But this is the governance structure that we've sort of landed on. We think is best with some of the team here. This is actually it's quite complex because key to making this project work is the the contribution of revolving loan fund, but another key aspect of it is the tax abatement. Right, we know that there has to be tax abatement, basically to make this work. And so key to this is the creation of the HDFC for each project. And so there's a process for that. And so there's each time an HDFC is created, you know, there have to be local consent. The Department of State is involved and the Common Council is involved because only the Common Council has the authority to determine the tax exemption for these projects, which we know will be needed. And that's the end. That's kind of the end of my contribute. I want to talk about next steps, but I have.
Okay,
You can,
so in those other states in Montgomery model, do they also have tax abatements?
yes. So
Okay.
in their model, it's a complete tax abatement forever. We based on some of the financial modeling that we've done, that's not necessary. I mean, I think the tax abatement is most important in kind of the first 10 to 20 years of a project for it to stabilize. And so that would be the general time frame in which we would be looking for. Also, obviously, New York State housing finance law is different than Maryland. And so the tax exemption period that the HDFC is legally entitled to here in New York is no more than 40 years. And so we wouldn't be able to go we wouldn't be able to be forever anyway.
Right.
So we'd be looking for something smaller, a little bit more narrow.
Okay. So I think some people will look at that as a subsidy.
It is part of the subsidy
Yeah.
On behalf of the public entity for sure.
Michael,
So regarding.
Sorry, I just want to say the public ownership, however, is permanent,
Okay.
and so is the affordable.
Okay.
My second question. Regarding land acquisition, is that the role of the non-for-profit or the Housing Development Fund Corporation?
That would be the nonprofit. Yeah, so the nonprofit would basically just be creating the HDFC for each project, but the nonprofit would be the driving entity for this. And keep in mind, the nonprofit rests under the city. So, you know, there's governance issues that will need to be worked through, right, or put down on paper, obviously, in terms of exactly how that relationship will work. So we're not there yet, but that's obviously an important conversation to have.
And regarding governance, I do want to just out there in the ether for everybody to think about, but I think it's really important for at least one member of the council to be on the non-for-profit board. And I really think we should approve the appointments that the mayor makes. That's not necessarily for you, but for us. But I think that that's a really important part of the governance of the.
Yeah, and we can look at some of the other models, right? There's, I was just looking at Chattanooga's, for instance. I think it's a 5-member board, and a few of those board members are appointed by one entity, and a few are appointed by another entity. And I think long term, it's important to have, you know, it needs to be sustainable. So good checks and balances, right, and a good relationship to make this work.
And I lost it. Oh.
You're too young for that stuff.
That's what happens when I don't write it down. So if for some reason the board felt it no longer necessary for the public to own this property, is there a mechanism for the private owner to become an owner, or is this public forever?
Good public forever.
Perfect. That's the answer I wanted to hear.
There's options where like the private, you know, if a private developer has a certain share, like they can exit, right, but the public forever.
I did remember my real question. Would they be able to, would projects under the HDFC, would they be able to access the county's housing action fund?
I don't see why not. Yeah, it's part of the.
And where in the process of, you said stalled projects, or, you know, I don't want to say stalled, but ongoing. Where how does that work for this non-for-profit to, help carry some of that load, across the finish line? And where does that negotiation come in? Do we become the part owner? Or do we become the majority partner?
Yeah, so in that instance, right, in exchange for participation, the public entity would become majority owner of the project once built. Again, subject to negotiation on a per project basis in line with the overall ethos and mission of the entity. I think, how that would work in practice is we have this nonprofit, right, we set up a private developer market, private developer partner could say, here's my pro forma, here's why my numbers aren't working. Like, can you run this by your model and see if you can help me? And we would say, yes, we will take a look and see if this will work. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my question is like, where does the money come from to make this happen?
Yeah,
Are you
so-
thinking that too?
Yes, have you advertised this out you?
Yeah, so
So we all
uh,
keep the same one.
we are exploring that. And so typically in some of these other jurisdictions, it's a bond, like in Montgomery County, they have bonded for the initial investment. And so that might be one avenue that we would take here. But there could be potentially other avenues that are to be determined for how to raise that initial investment. I think the good thing about that is it's one-time investment, right? And then it recycles through. So should there be any else, right now there's no ask for the Common Council for anything. But we're exploring ways to raise that money.
And are you able to talk about how other communities raise it, some of the things you're exploring?
Yeah, so typically it is bonding. So in the case of Chattanooga, they actually saved their entire allocation of ARPA funds for this model. We're not there, right? The state has also in the new state budget, they have a revolving loan fund allocation. Maybe there's a relationship with the city established in the state. So there's a few different methods, and I think once we start actually creating the structure, we'll be in a better position to raise the funds needed. At that point.
I have another follow-up question that somebody else may want. That's something else.
I don't know, Bob's got his hand up.
So my follow-up question is, how does this relate to what the state is talking about in terms of the permanently affordable housing model, social housing model that they're creating? Is this would be separate? Would it be parallel? Would we be able to do both? I'm just sort of curious because I went to see that presentation and thought it was
I think it's
very interesting.
I think it's.
I would say
I'm sorry.
I would say parallel.
Parallel is what I was
I
saying.
think they would also apply under the developer if they were interested.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I think the right. That is a pending legislation that hasn't passed yet, obviously.
correct.
But we can all agree that I think it would be beneficial to have a public development at the state level as well, doing this work. But there's no guarantee that that entity is going to be doing any work in Kingston or even nearby, unless I don't think there's anything in legislation about, where they're going to be working. And so, the timeline is unclear. So I see this as a tool for Kingston and hopefully in the near future as well. Rather than some of the longer state timeline.
Okay, thank you.
I was curious about the sort of financial timeline. So if we bonded for this, we would let that the non-for-profit, I would assume, will let that accrue interest for a couple of years. But how much of its funds is it looking to expend each year? Or is that ultimately a decision?
Yeah, so based on the models, so if we are able to raise, let's say, 12 million $12 million is the number. And so we believe that it's for around 200,000. It's every cycle.
Okay.
Yep. Based on the current model.
Bill?
But maybe this is a good time for next steps. And so there's the involvement of the Common Council is going to come into play, obviously, for the tax exemption piece. And probably what we will be looking at some point in the future is for the Common Council to pass a tax exemption policy for HDFCs under this model. And then possibly as the project kind of actually comes through, the Common Council would reaffirm that at that time, but still to be determined. But that is definitely the one piece. The one piece that the Common Council will need to be involved with. The other thing is, I would like the council to pass a resolution in support of this. It would basically be a memorializing resolution. Technically, there's no official approval that the Common Council would need to give, let's say, to the creation of this nonprofit. But nonetheless, kind of a memorializing resolution would be helpful at this stage. So those are the two next steps.
So at what point in the process of establishing the not-for-profit does the last piece on the list about determining the tax exemption come into play? Will that come into play parallel with creating it? So it's not like you create it and then we have to set it like after the fact?
Yeah, so I think, it's always helpful because this nonprofit is going to be looking at projects and making sure that there are feasible projects on the board. And so it would be helpful to know what the tax exemption policy is. And so I think this would be more of an upfront policy rather than a later policy,
Okay.
just so that there's clarity and no confusion.
Right. I agree.
This is just more thought time, what Michael said earlier, if we are doing a resolution, kind of a moralizing resolution, we could put our wishes into that, where we say it's a 5, maybe just a percentage if we don't want to stick to a specific number, but we could say we want, at least 30% control of the board or 50%, well, wouldn't be 50, it'd be an odd number, but and that would kind of solve that. So maybe think about anything else that you council members want to put in there. Are you writing something up, or are we writing something?
I will write something
For next month? Or not today?
Not today, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not expecting any action today.
Oh, all right. So can you put that, or we can just remember for next?
I will, I would draft something that the council can then add it.
Can you share that with us before the next meeting?
So this won't come back to us first. It's that your intention is that it would go to the council first rather than back to this committee?
Oh, no, it would go, when I say that.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, sorry, when I
Next-
say the
yeah,
council, I mean this.
This committee?
This
Okay.
committee.
Okay.
Is the affordability levels in the RFI?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
Thank you, Lord.
All right, thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Speaking of stalled projects, somebody asked me this weekend about the nursing home. Because they had gotten sign off like a year ago. From the planning board.
Yeah, they are looking for funding
Okay.
to make it.
Okay.
Dan. Number 3. Would you like to tell us about the memorializing resolution?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, all of you have seen this, presumably all of you have seen this resolution. And this is in response to activities that are going on at Stony Brook right now. in response to tenants having received a large packet in February, sorry, at the end of January, that essentially was sent to them by the Housing Development Fund Corporation, from the Housing and Community Renewal, 55 pages of, a packet for them to provide information about their rental status. And essentially what the owners are doing is applying for an exemption from the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, which of course, which a large number of them are subject. I mean, and this is why I wanted to have an attorney here, because my understanding is probably imperfect, but my understanding is that there is a category of tenants that are protected. The ones who have been there when the original agreement was signed, those tenants are protected by the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. And that there's a new category of affordable housing tenants that was established when the Housing Development Fund Corporation was set up through the regulatory agreement. And there was a deed of sale. The corporation took it over. They promised to create affordable housing there. There are various agreements. But I think what's happening now is, and what's of concern to the tenants, is that that this is asking, that basically what the owners are asking for is 100% exemption from the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. And there are tenants who are already protected by it. So this is so basically this would be a memorializing resolution that would go to the housing, the State Division of Housing and Community Renewal, asking if this application be denied. So that's essentially what this is about. Then there are other issues. The reason that I wanted to then look at the regulatory agreement is, and that's maybe we want to look at that first before we look at the resolution, is just to see what that regulatory agreement actually says about the city's responsibility, its obligations, the relationship between the city and the tenants who are there. All of this, of course, is fairly new to me because I was not here when this happened, which is why I wanted to have an understanding of it, and also to pass this resolution essentially in support of the tenants who are there, who are currently protected by ETPA, because they should be protected, whether or not I think everyone should be protected by ETPA, but there is this bifurcation of the different classes of tenants that I may be misunderstanding, but that's my understanding. And I don't want 100% of the tenants to be exempt from the Tenant Protection Act if there already are a class of tenants who are protected. So that's why we're looking at this. And Michelle may know more because she's been working with me on this.
Yeah, and I think you sent in the original council resolution for the regulatory agreement that explained about what we under the council understood as far as like tenants having ETPA tenants that were there.
Yes. So, so basically I have questions from that regulatory agreement for the attorney. And the first of which is, what is the looking at the clause in the regulatory agreement, which is in the packet, it's a law there is a clause that talks about how the tenants who were originally there are protected by ETPA.
Have you had a conversation with Corp Counsel yet about reading through the contract? Have you looked at it?
We've looked at it. I know there were a few emails today. If you want, I can go a little bit in depth on it. My understanding is that, the building itself is exempt from the HSTPA. However, the tenants that were there, are covered. They're essentially grandfathered in to get those protections. Why this might matter so much, because right now we're thinking even if there's only, a 10% turnover, that's still 90% of the building is protected, is because it allows, for different grants or loans might be available, different sorts of financing, especially when you're looking at a building that is, in need of repair.
So where in the regulatory agreement or anywhere does it say that the buildings are exempt
It does, to my knowledge, it doesn't
No,
say that
it's not there.
they're not exempt. But it does state that the tenants who were there in their existing apartments are protected.
Right.
But they're still trying to get rid of that. Is that what you said earlier?
That's-
Even the grandfather, so to speak?
Yeah, that's what I don't understand. I mean, it said they are asking for 100% exemption from ETPA. So my question really.
So
is-
it's not something that we put into the contract by because the not-for-profit that opts it out. You know, the HSTPA has an exclusion for nonprofit buildings.
Right.
They have an exclusion for buildings that are have received financing, like housing authorities who subsidize housing. Like Section 8 buildings. I think there's like ambiguity in there.
So there's definitely ambiguity.
You know, it does say any institution operated, you know, exclusively for charitable or on a nonprofit basis.
With
But
the
they're
city
claiming to be a charity.
as charity.
But, you know, I'm just looking at the regulatory agreement. In section 3, it says, in paragraph B, it says, the company shall, well, unit rents and resale
Can
restrictions.
you tell me what page?
Oh, page 4. If you go to page, sorry about that. If you go to page 4, section 2, at the bottom of the page, it talks about unit rents and resale restrictions. Then it talks about the company shall establish initial rents in accordance with the affordability plan. And that's for the new units and ones that come up when when existing ones are vacated. And then it says, notwithstanding this, the company shall continue to lease each unit that is occupied on or before the effective date. This agreement to each existing tenant in occupancy in accordance with each existing lease agreement and in accordance with the ETPA, the Housing Stability Tenant Protection Act of 2019, and applicable rent increases determined by the city's rent guidelines board, so long as the city of Kingston has a legitimately declared housing emergency in effect. So I guess my question is, since we do have an emergency declaration in effect, right? We still are subject to ETPA. Why would we then be interested in seeing these units removed from ETPA protections?
Have an interest in that.
Well, we would not have an interest at all in that, and that's why, that was sort of the genesis of this particular resolution. Was to really support, to say, please do not grant this exemption. Now, of course, if ETPA goes away, we're looking at an entirely different landscape, but right now, at this present moment, my understanding is that we want to protect these tenants.
So just looking at the state statute, the 2019 ETPA. So the exclusion includes housing accommodations owned or operated by a hospital, convent, monastery, asylum, public institution, or college or dormitory, or any institution operated exclusively for charitable or educational purposes on a non-profit basis, other than then it goes into a bunch of dates and stuff. So I don't believe that this owner is operating in the way that the law is intended. Personally, so I would support this resolution.
I support this resolution because the tenants do not, they feel like they were guaranteed ETPA protections. And I don't, it's very convoluted who's enforcing. So how is, if they're opted out of ETPA, then they don't have the protections. You can't enforce something that's no longer a law.
Right, and I know that we as the city are managing this regulatory agreement, but does that prevail over the state? It doesn't seem to me that it does. Again, this is where I am confused, except for the fact that I do understand that the owners are trying, the owners have put in an application to DHCR to exempt 100% of the rental units from E ETPA.
Do we have a number of how many units are now workforce housing versus BTPA?
I do not, but I can look into that and see if I can find out.
Because also for the regulatory agreement, they can declare their tax exemptions. They're getting some pretty significant tax exemptions. So it's not very clear
Yeah,
if they're earning more and they're getting, tax exemptions and stuff's not being fixed. And there's still some major issues going on there that were going on
Are there any?
2 years ago.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Are there any legal services that are helping the tenants to
Yes.
understand the rights?
yes. In fact, I can tell you that the legal services of the Hudson Valley has.
This alley?
Yeah,
She went to law school together.
no, it's Marcy.
Marcy.
Oh, Marcy. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Marcy.
Marcy works with Marcy.
Okay, so anyway,
She's
yes.
at Hudson Valley Justice Center.
So they're in two different organizations. But anyway, so Marcy from Legal Services has been helping them. And in fact, what she did is she has responded to the first set of documents on behalf of the tenants. And stating that they didn't need to provide, they were asking for like a list of, they wanted to see leases, they wanted to see amounts they were paying. The leases and the rent rolls are something the landlord should have. And some of the tenants who were originally there, who've been there for 30, 40 years, don't currently have leases. So there's some confusion on that too, but yes, they're being helped and they received a second packet asking for more information, and she also responded on their behalf. With a number of them signing, not everyone had to sign, but a large percentage of them. And she's been working directly with the tenants union there. So yes, they do have legal assistance. But this is separate because this is just a way that essentially we would be supporting them in this effort. And of course, their legal counsel has also asked that this be denied.
Yeah, I think because you understand the sentence.
That's my feeling also.
Yeah, I forgot to mention this to you. Last week, someone sent me a receipt they applied for an apartment. So we run and they were charged over $500 for application fees.
As an application
It's
fee?
not recurring. Yeah, I'll send it to you.
And
So
now are the tenants under workforce housing? I would assume that they're paying more in rent
yes,
than the ETPH protected tenants.
yes.
And do you know the difference?
It's listed actually the rates are sort of listed as part of the regulatory agreement here. 10%. It's Exhibit B on page 15. So it talks about the income restrictions. So and it depends on the apartment because each apartment is different. Some of them are 2 bedrooms, some of them are 1 bedroom. So the rental rate will depend upon the size of the apartment. But it's more.
Yeah.
It's definitely more than what the current.
And if someone loses ETPA technically and they have to be then all of this, right? Like they may not qualify. They
Right.
might not earn enough.
Yeah, have folks been kicked out because they do not earn enough?
No, not to my knowledge, no. And in fact, I think in the regulatory agreement, it says that they cannot be kicked out. If their income is low, it's just, yeah.
And do you know if the ETPA protected tenants, and actually, I guess even the non-ones who've been there, have they received their negative rental adjustment?
Not to my knowledge. Has anyone, I don't know.
I haven't.
What?
I haven't.
No, I was going to say, I'm not aware that anyone has received
Has followed the law.
a 15% reduction.
Do the ETPA tenants have leases? Like has
Some
anyone's
of them
lease
do.
has been renewed and are they official ETPA leases?
I do not think so. That's another question that that needs to be asked as to whether or not they've been renewed. I mean, I know that some of the original tenants have their old leases, and that's what they're being asked to provide. As far as what the renewal process is, I'm not certain. And some of those questions maybe we'll answer when we get into the next part. The actual agreement. But,
I think it's a real, it's a terrible thing. That's what's been happening to these tenants for years, ever since, these buildings just keep getting flipped and these, tenants are,
there's a lot of deferred maintenance, and some of the buildings are in better condition than others. It really just depends on the location of the apartment, the location within the complex. Like most apartment buildings, some, the lower floors are suffering more than the upper floors because of, water leakage, things like that. But it's been deferred maintenance because this used to be a luxury apartment complex. And has just gone downhill because maintenance has been deferred, and now the current owner, has been taking some steps, working with building safety to, address some of the concerns on a case-by-case basis. But there's still major repairs that need to be made.
Do you know how often building safety is there?
I know that
It's frequent.
I would say during the winter months, when people's heaters stop working, I would hear from a tenant, I would call building safety, they would go right over, and I think then it was maybe, once every 2 weeks or so, and when there was a leak, plumbing inspector went and took a look, and I was there when they were looking at it. So they have been helpful. And there's some issues that they really can't address, which is something that I want to bring up in another public safety meeting that has to do with mold. There's some residual damage from the leaks, and the city building department can't.
I know, it's
Can't do
all
that.
messed up.
It's the state that's involved in that. So I've been following up with that. But yeah,
all right, so I guess this is the $1 million question. Are they included in the study?
That gets to some of the methodology of the study. That's it's yes.
Okay.
Part of the study.
Okay.
Are we just talking about the memorializing presentation right now?
right now.
Okay. But I think it's great to support it,
Yeah, we've been listening to this for a couple of years now, so yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm certainly supporting this.
Yeah, right. So I think we have a majority here. Is there
Bob, are you filling in or?
No, I'm just watching.
Okay.
but you have the board.
Yeah, well,
Do you
yeah.
have the, right?
Yeah. Okay, we have a resolution here, committee report, I mean. A resolution of the Common Council. Instead of my own handwriting on this. A resolution of the Common Council of Kingston, New York, calling on the New York State Division of Housing and Community Renewal to deny the application for an order submitted by the Kingston Workforce Housing Development Fund Corporation exempting the Stony Run apartment complex from the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974.
Motion.
Second.
Any other discussion before I call for a vote?
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks for.
Well, thank you for your support of this. I appreciate it. And thank you, Michelle, for helping me by filling in all the background information since you were here. That was.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Motion carries.
Thank you, everyone. And now we go to the next item.
That's you also.
How about that? And this is something that, again, I think this is where I'll need some legal advice.
It's not that Baker's here probably for this too.
Oh, he is?
Yeah.
Oh,
Did you
Yes,
ask me?
no. I just wrote to court counsel and asked if somebody would be here to go, just to, look at some questions about the.
May I ask your goal for this, just better understanding of?
Oh, yeah,
some of the
just better understanding some of the clauses, because this was an agreement that involved the city, looking at the parties to this include, right, the city, Kingston Village Propco LLC, and the Housing Development Fund Corporation that was set up. So there are multiple parties to this agreement. And what concerned me when I was reading it is that it mentions a reserve account, that in terms of replacement funds that would be set aside. And so my question was, since the city monitors this agreement, what obligation or responsibility do we have to look at this reserve account? It says on page 5 that the company shall deposit into a replacement reserve account an amount equal to $66,500 per year. And then it talks about what it could be used for. Now, have we ever seen that reserve fund? It seems to me that it says the replacement reserve should be held either by the company in a segregated account separate from other funds of the company, or by the company's lender in a segregated account. So it seems to me that we, as the legislative body that's responsible for this, should be able to see that and understand. I don't know if we have, and since this is something that was approaching a life of 2 years, it seems that it might be time to take a look and just sort of see if there was a reserve fund set up, how it's been used to pay for repairs. And then if you go down page 5 further, onto page 6, it talks about how the controller, is during this term, the covenants of the company and HDFC set forth herein are enforceable by the controller as a contract beneficiary. So what is our obligation as a city in terms of understanding how this corporation is operating and whether it's doing its job in terms of repairs? That's all.
And you had spoken to Barbara Grace Pollard about this, right? And she suggested that this is the way you should move forward by putting it on the agenda. Discussing it.
And basically, in one of her replies to me in an email today, she said the council should be asking the owners to answer questions about the reserve accounts.
Okay.
But I don't have the answers here. But
No, you don't have the answers, but I guess,
have you talked to, I don't know if this is a John Tui or a Dan Baker.
I don't know.
Have you talked to either of them?
I have not. I just reached out to Corp Council initially.
Okay, yeah, because it's really a question of, because we typically don't have the oversight. So if we want to, on these agreements necessarily, I think we ask them to come to the committee and ask them questions, and they just go directly to them. I think that they could say no, but I think that would be very telling. That's what you're looking at, some of these, I agree, we should know if they have set up a reserve account, because they haven't, they wrote the agreement, it does say that they may withdraw, so they don't have to use the money, but they do have to deposit that money into an account. I forgot the other one that you said.
And hopefully they're actually using that money to make repairs, but it would be useful to see that.
Right.
And what is a repair that requires going to the reserve account, and what is the repair of just?
Oh, they list some eligible replacement repairs. It said replacements shall include but are not limited to mechanical systems, roofing, plumbing, infrastructure, site work, architectural, engineering work. It's on page
Okay.
5.
Thank you.
It also says it may withdraw, so it doesn't say that they have to use it, they just have to have that
Set aside,
set aside.
right.
That's what I would recommend. Otherwise it's kind of hodgepodge from city officials and departments, I should say. Trying to get the answers when we should just be able to directly ask them
Okay.
about this agreement that they said.
I don't think it's unreasonable to get either an annual or quarterly report on this.
That's what I was thinking, that an annual report would seem to be something that's required. It's not specifically stated in here, but it seems worth following up on.
There's nothing in this agreement that says anything about oversight or reports.
It's not that I've seen, which is also a concern.
I thought we talked about that, didn't we?
it was for like the first year, like it was something running.
They have to come back.
Yeah,
Did they? I don't
we never
remember.
had any information. And also, this reserve fund was supposed to be in effect for after they completed all of the work. Making the original repairs, which is why they needed more funding. They said, you know, like they blew through their original loans, they needed to refinance in order to finish the work. So it'll be good to know what was finished at that time. And what the reserves have been used.
Seems like a good question to ask.
So section 10 is called records and reports.
Oh,
And article D or subsection D would be,
wait, which page?
page 7.
Oh, here it is. Records
Says the
and reports.
company shall provide monthly updates to the residents of Stony Run and the comptroller describing ongoing capital related project for the initial 12 months of the agreement. We're past that 12 months, but
If you go to clause B, I think it, actually, you know, financial statements are included with, you know, controller shall have the right to request up to 2 times a year financial statements in regards to the project.
and you will have to forgive me for this, but we're talking about our city comptroller, right? Not
That's
the
what-
state comptroller.
That's what I'm, what I read it as, but let me, double check.
Sorry. Yes, thank you for pointing that out.
No, but I think that it's not, I think that just further proves that it's not unreasonable for us to also receive these updates.
Right, they're going to the
Does,
assessor.
at page 3, it, you know, comptroller means our comptroller.
And then the assessor is getting reports as well, because then that's how they determine their taxes estimates.
Well, it does say the company shall provide monthly updates and the comptroller to the Stony Run tenants and comptroller describing ongoing capital related projects for the initial 12 months. And you're saying that never happened.
Yeah, that's what, I asked one of the townies when I saw her.
So it seems like it's time to, so I can put in a communication that to ask John Toohey to appear. Would that be a finance? Well, I'll leave it up to you, to which committee.
I would maybe reach out to John and ask him to make this request on behalf of us.
Okay,
But I would still say, why not tell the developers to come in here?
okay.
John's not gonna have all the questions or all the answers to the questions that I think you may have.
We may have some questions.
Right.
And I'm in contact
So
with, I have contacts there.
So
I can
well,
contact them.
Or if you would like me to, if you want to do
Well,
it.
you and I can talk about it. Yes.
I'm happy to do it if you want me to. I'm tough sounding in emails.
Yes, you're good at, you can do a very good email, very good email. You do.
We volunteer.
So you're volunteering, if I can take you up, I would.
You have the contact information?
Yes, I do.
I
We'll
think,
be in touch.
not to use the title, but I think hearing from the president might be a little bit more of a push. For them to go in, maybe, I don't know.
Why not?
Sorry. But I would also reach out to John and ask him
I will definitely reach out.
to get the reports that it says in section 10, clause B.
Okay, well, thank you. This is very helpful in terms of thinking of next steps. And I will reach out to John. I'll be in touch with both you and John and we'll figure out what to do.
Should we also speak with the assessor as well?
Yeah, I can rope him into it too. So I'll loop him in.
Okay, thank you.
Not rope.
Given they have to report to him as well for the yearly
Yeah, yes.
tax abatements.
That's in here too? Okay, yeah, so if you could reach out to him and see if he could.
They seem like very significant tax abatements.
So. Anyway, thank you for this discussion.
I would also be interested, I know Michelle said she heard from one tenant. But Sarah, when you're there and talking to the tenants, see if any of them got monthly updates in that first year. Because if we're gonna bring them in and ask that question, I would like to have the other side.
Yeah, I think having the president of the tenants union or chair, whatever they.
Oh, yeah, no,
themselves Would also be, too.
yes, there are two members of there's a tenants association. And two of those members sit on a board with the property manager and the owners. So I will reach out to them. I've been working with them over the last year or so. I'll let them know. And I'll ask them if they received any monthly updates.
And then, Sarah, I would also ask the tenants if their lease renewals, like current tenants are getting, an ETPA form with the state of New York logo. I think that's an official, I don't know, I can show it to you.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll ask that too.
Yeah,
I, of course, have not seen before because
No, I've never
I've
seen that.
yeah, tenants in Chestnut Mansion just started receiving their official
Oh, wow.
ETPA lease renewals.
And when did they start receiving those? Just this spring?
Yes.
Wow, okay.
Sarah, when does this agreement go? Is there an end date to it or like, is this gonna have to be renegotiated at all?
I think it's a 40-year
40 year?
agreement.
It's a 581 tax abatement.
Yes. The term of this agreement shall be effective as of the date the property is transferred to HDFC. That wasn't shall expire the later of 40 years from the date of this agreement or the expiration or termination. So, I don't know how it would cause it to expire, but it says 40 years.
If they sell.
Pardon?
If they sell.
Oh. So. Here's our attorney. But
Yeah,
as an answer.
I'm thinking that's written more for like, you know, if there's like a status change, if laws differ or at the state level, or you know, if there's like a breach of contract so egregious, we might want to pursue.
Expiration.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Good to know. Thank you all. This has been very helpful.
Thank you for
Thank you.
helping out with these tenants.
It's actually been my pleasure to help them. I've gotten to know some of them. And, you know, I mean,
I need it.
they need the help, and I'm happy to help them.
So you'll reach out to me.
Absolutely.
Okay, folks.
I didn't write it on my to-do list. I didn't write it on my to-do list.
No, it's not mine, so that
Okay. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Motion,
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
second,
Second. Oh, yeah, I don't understand. I don't know this.